our generation is forgetting right now, Vikas, is that we have the knowledge that allows us to look at an AI output and say, this sounds odd. If we don't give that knowledge to the children, ingrained and something they really learn and know from a trusted source, I'm very afraid of the scale of manipulation that right now a few companies, and it might not even be, devil's manipulation of people purposefully, but it will just be one or two ways of thinking that will be imposed to the rest of the world. And I think that is very scary. And so you need that root knowledge. The key is that I think we can access that root knowledge much faster with AI. But it needs to be teacher or school driven.
Hello and welcome to the EdVance Podcast. I'm your host, Vikas Pota. There's a school in Switzerland that has educated kings, princes, heads of state, and some of the most powerful families on earth for nearly 150 years. It sits on the banks of Lake Geneva in summer and moves its entire community, students, teachers, and staff to a village of chalets in the Swiss Alps every winter. It is called the Institut Le Rosey. My guest today, Christophe Gudin, is the Director General of Le Rosey, a school he first knew not as its leader, but as its student. Before returning to lead it, he trained as an engineer, earned his MBA at INSEAD, consulted at McKinsey, and founded Cyber Education, an EdTech initiative aimed at improving education in Switzerland and Europe. He's bilingual in English and French, a husband and father of three, and the person responsible for continuing Le Rosey's enduring vision of a school for life. Christophe, welcome to the EdVance Podcast. Christophe, thank you for joining the EdVance Podcast, where we focus on high performance. And your school has been around for a very long time, and you've figured out what makes it work and makes it high performing. Can you tell us, from your perspective as being Director General of the Institut Le Rosey, what makes a great school?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Vikas. Pleasure to see you again. What makes a great school, I think, starts with being a happy place. And sometimes we tend to forget that. But if you want to learn, you need to be happy. It also needs to be a place where students can keep their roots, know their roots, be grounded, but flourish in many very different directions and explore and be able to really grow in different directions with their roots being solid. And with that, it means you need to know what makes you tick. You need this for students. They need to know where they want to spend hours on end and where they really want to become passionate. And the last one is, of course, that you need a great school, I think, needs to push a bit their students. They need to be hardworking. They need to fail, because you don't succeed if you don't fail.
And when you walk into a school, how do you get them, how do you get the feel that this is a good school? I understand the theory that you're saying, I get it, but how do you practically know it?
You speak with students, right? Whenever I visit a school, and I try to visit at least 2 or 3 every year, the key element is being able to speak to 1 or 2 of the students at the very least, right? And that gives you very quickly an impression of how do they relate to the school? Is it a place they speak with enthusiasm? Is it a place they speak about what they're doing? Is it a place they speak about only the people? And what they say, if you let them open up and speak up a bit, will tell you quite a lot about the school. And then it's, of course, about walking around in the school and witnessing interactions between people, and witnessing the types of activities that are happening, how busy the kids are. Those are all things that I think give me at least an impression of a school.
And, for those that are not as knowledgeable about the boarding school space, can you say a little bit about your school, the history of the school, what marks it out as a place of distinction? Give everyone a succinct summary of Le Rosey.
So Le Rosey was born out of Jura, which is a mountain next to us, that was invaded by the nearby neighbors from the Bern canton, the Bernese, and they imposed German. And this French-speaking teacher said, no way, I'm not going to be imposed one language and one culture. That doesn't work. And so he left. He arrived in Rolle and he founded the school on an old castle that was falling apart. and said, I want this school to be open to the world and to be the antithesis of what they were trying to impose on me. And this Kulturkampf. And so he opened the school with 4 students, a German, an Italian, a Swiss, and a French. And from there, the roots of a place that is Swiss, because Switzerland has this identity, this cultural openness to the world, and it's been used in many different ways, but that is open to the world and open to different ideas, open to people that think very differently, was at the very root of the school. And it's grown since in that direction quite a lot. It's grown in many other directions, but clearly having a school, and today we have very strict quotas. We never take more than 10% from any one country, including Switzerland. And really, when we say country, we say cultural background, because most of our students have 2, 3, some have 5 or 6 passports. So it'd be easy to play on passports, but it's really, we want students to always feel in a minority. And when you're in a minority, you might feel comfortable with a few friends that speak the same language, that have a similar background, but you'll never be enough to have a real friend group. And so you'll need to reach out, and you'll need to build bridges, and you'll need to understand the other to build that friendship. And that really is one of the core elements of boarding schools in Switzerland, quite frankly, which I think Rosey is particular focused on, and has historically done incredibly well in mixing those cultures. So that was really the founding philosophy of the school. And another maybe oddity of Le Rosey is that it has, in the 146 years now of existence, I'm only the 5th director of the school. So the longevity tends to be pretty big. And it's always been directed by its owner. And I think that gives a freedom to live tradition, but break out of traditions. And the school has done that in history quite a few times. The first and the craziest move probably in our school's history was by the son's founder, Henri Carnal, who during the First World War decided, because the students couldn't go really anywhere, to go for Christmas up in the mountains with a train that just arrived. And they loved the place, and the students managed to convince this crazy man to stay up there for the whole following winter. And since 1916, we've been going up to Zugstad every single winter, and the whole school moves there. And I think each of its successors had those hooray moments that are empowered because the school is looked after by people that care so deeply about it, but have also the ability to break from a mold. And so Le Rosey was the very first school in Switzerland, and I think one of the very first in continental Europe to have co-ed boarding, for instance, and have girls as well as boys. And it was a revolutionary idea when it came through, where a lot of alumni, a lot of parents were very upset with it. It obviously turned out to be a very successful and I think the right move. But that is the freedom that this gives. And most recently, I think the emphasis that has been put on the arts, on having a real concert hall. With next week, we have a production of Madame Butterfly, and all the students will sit through a 3-hour opera on campus. We've had the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, we've had the Berliner Philharmonic Orchestra, and this is an opening to culture, which I think was relevant 10 years ago, but is arguably even more relevant in an AI world to define what makes us human. And so those bold moves have defined the school in many ways. And I think one of the ones we're taking now is around entrepreneurship, but impact entrepreneurship. How do you create, our motto is Actus Virtus, is that acts speak louder than voices, than words, and how do you create a lasting impact is something we're very carefully crafting with the students.
You very kindly hosted me at your school some months back, and I was blown away to the extent that you have the belief that, by sharing and being open, you lift all boats, as it were, as to what is happening in your very high performing school. And there's 3 things that stood out for me were these. One was just the incredible school design that you have, the architecture, the buildings. And I know that you've had a massive investment program that has built the most incredible facilities. I stood in that hall that you talked about with the Philharmonic Orchestra. I went to the building that looks like a spaceship. I think it was amazing. Like, I quote it as one of the most, incredible school buildings that I've ever seen. And so congratulations on that. That was the first thing that stood out for me. And the second thing that really did blow blow my mind was around, you take the school, and I don't just mean, the staff, you take everyone up to Stad for the winter season, as it were, and you operate two schools, two separate campuses in the same year. And how you described it was, it's a different learning experience as a whole, and it's a different learning opportunity. I remember that stood out for me. And then the third thing that really, I think you hammered home, actually, was around this impact on entrepreneurship, like you talked about. And I was taken a little bit aback by that, given that your focus on impact and contributing to the world was pretty spectacular. And so I say congratulations to you for what you have created. But Christophe, when you think about boarding schools in specific, what makes a boarding school work?
Well, it's the two components. It's the students and it's the teachers. And they're intertwined way more in a boarding school, and especially in our setup, which is quite unusual, especially for British boarding schools that tend to have fairly dedicated boarding staff. Our teachers are our boarding staff. And so the vast majority of our teachers live on campus with their families in the boarding houses and look after the students. And I think you need to find the right people to do that, because it's not a given that you want to live with 30, 40 teenagers, 40 weeks in the year. That will be a bit rowdy at times, that will come up and share their emotions. And it takes a particular set of people that actually thrive on that, and are happy to be there and help building this community. And it also takes students that want to be independent, that want to be able to grow their own personality. And I think in a boarding school, that gives them the opportunity to do it much more than in day school, because they obviously have their roots. And I started with that. And this is why, for instance, we have 26 languages that are offered at mother tongue, right? You have to keep the roots. You have to keep your literature. You have to know where you come from. And with that, you're able to explore. And I think being in a slightly more independent environment where you have a set of rules that are the same for everyone, that are neutral in a way, you're also able to build your personality in a much more powerful way than if you're constantly listening to what your parents are saying. As interesting and powerful as what your parents' ideas are, it allows you to get a little distance, especially when you grow up, to forge your own identity. And I think this is especially true in a boarding environment like ours, where some of our students have never been their own in the schools they were in. And when they come in Rosey, they really become their first name, and nobody cares who their parents are. And that's one of the beauty of our school, is that who your parents are never going to be a way to impress anyone in the school. What you do in the school is. And I think it's true of a number of boarding schools, but it's particularly true of Rosey. We've had, movie stars, children or people that in their countries would not go unrecognized, that said, this is the best thing that has ever happened to me, because I came here and nobody cared about it. And so I was able to develop my own personality. I was able to develop my own characters and things I loved. And sometimes it's following the parents' footsteps, actually quite a few times, and that's obviously perfectly fine. And others, it's actually going in a very different direction. And that is very powerful.
And how do you, is there a characteristic that marks out a Le Rosey student? After they leave, and let's say you see them 20 years down the line, can you tell that this kid has been to Le Rosey?
It's a comment I've heard very regularly from outsiders, from people that know Roseyans, that know former students without having been in school. And they always tell me, I'm amazed how adaptable Roseyans are, and how they're able to be at ease, be it with a Maasai sharing a goat in the middle of nowhere, thousands of kilometers away from hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest town, or sitting at the president's or king's table. They will be at ease, and they'll be able to feel comfortable and contribute meaningfully to the discussions, to what is happening. And I think that is clearly a trait that is quite powerful. The other one we keep reassessing is our motto, Actis Virtus. And I think Roseyans tend to act, not without reflection, of course, but it's not only about what I say, it's about what I actually do. And we have countless alumni that have done very impressive things and have kept this, I think, to heart, to say I can write anything I want on a marketing stint, but what do I really do? And I think it's quite true to the school as well.
And, Christophe, we, in our organization, we organized, for example, the world's best school prizes, and we see the prizes surface so many best practices from around the world as to what drives high performance. If you had to put your finger on it, would you agree that school culture is probably the number one thing that drives high performance?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how a culture that works is absorbed quickly, right? When you have new students, when you have new staff, the positive elements of your culture, and sadly, if you have some, the negatives, but I think the positive, especially, are very quickly absorbed. And that is a good definition to me of a strong school culture, is if you go in and the new students within a few months, you don't see the difference anymore. You cannot tell who was here a year before, who arrived 2 months earlier. And with that, it creates this drive of doing a lot of things. It creates this drive of being ambitious. It creates this drive of what impact do I want to leave? And all this can be ingrained, but you have to have the culture so that you bring in people very quickly and so that you can act on it.
Yeah, I mean, we've created an assessment called Best School to Work to help schools firstly assess what their culture is and then go on this journey of improvement. If those that are listening that want to know more, please do go to our website and have a look at it. But, the thing that strikes me about a school like yours is there's a crisis in the world today around teacher recruitment and retention. And I would imagine that you don't have that problem. But how do you see the role of the teacher going forward, especially for schools like yours?
Thankfully, indeed, teacher recruitment is not a big issue for us. We're lucky to have a number of very strong applicants whenever we recruit a teacher. We don't recruit that often teachers either. We've grown in what we offer, and so we regularly add a few teachers, but very few leave beyond retirement. And so I think teachers are the key in setting the community that we mentioned, but they're going to be the key in making it evolve. And teacher training in that aspect is going to be very powerful. With AI, we're going to ask more of teachers. We have to be very honest there, because we'll ask them to continue doing what most boarding teachers are doing very well, is care deeply about the kids that are under their care, and be very human and get to know them and get to personalize their attention because they know them. And that will remain, I think, even more so in the face of AI, because we'll need those human rapport. But beyond that, we also need them to increasingly know how to use the AI tools. And then we're bringing the whole teaching staff this summer before the term starts for a few days with a few trainers, and we're working on a lot of different strategies there. But it will really be making sure they make the most out of those tools, and they're able to use the tool to personalize their teaching even more. They're able to use those tools to give very dedicated feedback that they then review with the students. They're able to use those tools to prepare very relevant, very personal classes. And all this needs obviously to be learned. And then the big hope, of course, of AI is what I think a few schools are trying, in my opinion, a little early, if I'm very honest. I don't like using students as guinea pigs. But that is very promising in using AI to shorten the knowledge acquisition so that you can actually do way more problem solving and way more impact driven work using the knowledge that AI will have given the children much faster.
Christophe, this podcast really focuses on high performance in schools, and you very kindly agreed to come on and share some of your thoughts. We asked you to list three main points as to what drives high performance from your experience. Can you tell us what your first is?
Absolutely. The first one is a very simple one, is that schools should never lose what their objective is. And their objective will always be to provide the best possible education for the children in their care. And as obvious as it sounds, I've seen schools where this might not be the case, where other stakeholders, be it parents that are very powerful on the board and are looking at what they think is best, but might be for their families rather than for the entire student body, take over. Or I've seen schools where former teachers are leading the school and they're listening. Of course, you should listen to all stakeholders, but they're listening only to the teachers and not as much to the others. And then sometimes schools lose track. I've also seen schools do things for marketing reasons rather than because it serves the kids' education's purpose. And I think that is the key element, to be laser sharp on any decision you make. How does this benefit the children's education? Whereas we do crazy things, and people might question, we've put 2 slides, for instance, in the new building that you were talking about earlier, and people might question, how does this do to the education? And I would argue it does a lot, because as I started this interview with, a happy place is where you'll learn much better. And you should see the smile of every single kid that goes down those slides every time. And it reminds people that education is light and can also be enjoyable. There's times where you're going to suffer, and that's fine, but there's also times where you should laugh and have fun. And I think you need to be very careful in whatever you do to make sure you think through how it will impact the students.
And tell me about your second lesson.
The second lesson, we touched a little bit upon it, I think, is that the teachers will always be the key. And as much as you should be focused on what is your objective, 90% of how you reach that objective will not be buildings, will not be slides, will not be technology, will actually be the people that are with the children. And making sure you have the right teachers for the environment you create, making sure you have teachers that feel empowered, that feel motivated, is not an easy task by any means. And I think we all have times where we struggle. We all have times where we might have dissensions. But keeping the teachers on board and making sure they are able to do their job and not swamped down by administrative tasks or by a range of other things is a key to high-performing schools.
Tell us what you do to enhance greater teacher satisfaction and that they stay to the end of their careers. What is it that you do?
There's a few things. One is, of course, I think we offer quite a privileged and beautiful life setting, right? The teachers, as I said, are living on our campuses and they're beautiful. And we make sure the places where they stay is nice, and we make sure that the whole campus feels like a homey place where they feel at home. And having their children with them, for instance, and their family with them and their dogs with them is an important part of feeling this is my home and this is a place I want to care for. I think that is definitely a powerful setup. I think it's, of course, also about trying to equilibrate how much you ask of teachers and making sure they have this time and energy to come up with new projects, to come up with new ideas. And we're lucky to have a number of teachers in Rosey that do that. Right? This week, we're actually going through Poetry Live, which is a recitation of hundreds of our students in the evenings that was launched by an English teacher. We've had the science teachers a few years ago that started this idea of doing a CubeSat and launching it in space, and it came from their idea. Right? So you need to have teachers empowered to have those ideas to move forward, because that's what's going to keep them very motivated.
And tell us about your third lesson.
My third lesson is that it's might be a slightly lighter one in people's mind, but I think it's a very important one, is that schools are, again, made for children and teenagers, and they need to be fun. They need to be creative. Hard work does not mean dull place. And every school that has been around for a while has traditions, has a range of things that teachers might like less or more. And I think keeping some of those traditions alive and being very careful to keep a cheeky spirit, because down the road, that is what the children will remember in 10 years and 20 years, which we know very well because we see our alumni very often. They're incredibly connected between each other and with the school. And those are powerful little nuggets that link everybody together, that links the generations of alumni together. And, every British teacher that arrives in Rosey is always surprised that our student representative, for instance, what the British boarding schools call prefects, the teachers have absolutely no say in who they are. They're purely elected by the students. And we've had amazing students committee, we call them presidents, and we've had slightly less good. And that's okay. That worked. And when it's less good, the students learn also that their vote might have not be the smartest and the wisest one. And I think you need to let schools live a bit those type of traditions and let students fail at things that you think will be okay in the end. And it's an easy path to say, I want everything. And I'll be honest, I sometimes fall into it as well. And I have to fight myself. And having been a student at the school helps, because then I go back to those memories. And I think you need to make sure you keep those traditions, you keep those small, fun enlightenment moments that will create a school community in many ways.
Christophe, we've talked about teachers, we've talked about students. The missing leg is always the parents. And you're a boarding school, so yes, a little bit less in terms of daily engagement with parents. But tell us, what is the secret sauce in managing demanding parents?
For me, it's a very easy one. You need to build the trust. And the trust, 95% in our case, is built when parents understand we care. And if you genuinely care, and you can share that, and you're able to communicate that with the parents, because you're proactive and you reach out before there's a real issue, because you explain very clearly what are the consequences of that decision or why you don't want a student to miss a day of class for something. You might disagree at times, and that's fine, but parents need to be reassured that we care. And a student absence, for instance, is an interesting one, right? Because it is one most schools would at times struggle with parents. But I think the fact that we are so careful about saying we don't let students go away unless there's really, really good reasons. And there are times, Rosey is not a prison, so parents might at times disagree with us and take them, but there's then consequences if we disagree within our framework. But the fact that we're so keen on that, the fact that we ask, bothers a bit parents, and at the same time sends the message that we do care that your children learn, we do care that they're with us, we do care to look after them. And I think those small elements of showing the parents that in everything we do, we care about your children is the very first key to have the trust. In our case, we're then also very lucky to have obviously a tradition and a school reputation that helps us in many ways, because we can explain to parents that our experience has shown many things. We've gone through in 6 years, a lot of different scenarios. And in a number of cases, we can say, this has happened in the past, and this is what happened, and this is why we're doing this, which obviously helps a lot.
So if you're Christophe, if you're a school principal that's listening to this podcast, what would your advice be to them to actually think about the future and adapt to the future? What would be your practical steps that a school principal needs to take to prepare for that future?
I think a lot of that has to do with tech. And the very first, if you haven't done so, I think is you need to restrict, at the very least, phone usage in the school. If it's a day school, I would completely ban it. If it's a boarding school, in our case, the phones have to be in the rooms at all times. The level of addiction of a number of children today is scary. When children come back from holidays and you look at how much time they spent on their phones in holidays, it's scary. And so I think schools have to have a very first responsibility in making sure that this is looked after. But the second one is then, what do you do with technology that is very powerful? Because there are so many things empowering. And I mentioned a few earlier in terms of using AI to personalize, in terms of using AI to have the children get more knowledge, grow knowledge, use it in a Socratic way without giving an answer, but actually to challenge what they're doing, to make whatever they're learning deeper and better. And our view right now is that the path forward there is going to be highly managed device. The truth is, the open models that are out there, whether it's OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, they're all bad at educating at this stage. It's doable. It's not technically that complicated to have models that are actually pretty good at only challenging rather than giving answers, but they're not the ones out there that the kids and the public is using. And so you need to restrict the access to those models because it is so easy to just cognitive offload, do something fast using your phone to ask the question on ChatGPT and copy it back on your school computer. And so that balance of having a safe environment where the children use technology in wise ways has to come. And we're pushing quite a bit in that direction right now. And we're thinking of managing the phone devices, of course, because in the boarding school, the children will have phones to keep in touch with the family, which is extremely important. But we'll also be soon managing those devices so that we have that certainty that the children are working on the tools that actually make them grow rather than lose sight of what they're doing and forget everything.
And Christophe, what do you think about this often stated criticism of schools saying that curriculum is outdated? How do you square that circle if you're not Le Rosey?
I think a lot of the curriculum's content is not outdated. And I might be slightly controversial there, but I do believe that a foundation of knowledge is absolutely key. Because you're never going to be able to discriminate. I think what our generation is forgetting right now, Vikas, is that we have the knowledge that allows us to look at an AI output and say, this sounds odd. If we don't give that knowledge to the children, ingrained and something they really learn and know from a trusted source, I'm very afraid of the scale of manipulation that right now a few companies, and it might not even be, devil's manipulation of people purposefully, but it will just be one or two ways of thinking that will be imposed to the rest of the world. And I think that is very scary. And so you need that root knowledge. The key is that I think we can access that root knowledge much faster with AI. But it needs to be, we need to look at the path of knowledge. We need to look at the type of knowledge that the children will have. Because if we let 3 companies in the Silicon Valley decide what the whole world learns, this is going to be a very scary place. And so we need to have an input on what do the kids learn and at what pace and in which order. And then the kids will learn it faster with AI. And that is where comes the idea that the curriculum can be upgraded, because then you can do so many more things than what typical curriculums are right now offering. You can actually put in practice all this knowledge that you're getting in this core knowledge base that you have.
Academic excellence begins with a great school culture. Vision, leadership, and a positive working environment are the keys to success. It's all part of the hidden curriculum. But how can your institution prove that it passes the test? Welcome to Best School to Work, your guide and beacon for great school culture. Imagine a future where schools shine and teachers thrive. Our certification program empowers schools to create a positive culture that stands out from the rest. While detailed guidance and expert-led courses allow schools to keep improving their culture, achieving certification will put your school on the map. Best School to Work is the gold standard of school culture. Together, let's transform education. Join Best School to Work and create a brighter future for our schools, students, and educators. Start your journey today.
What about, I pick on a thread here, which comes up quite regularly now, which is around the social emotional health of school communities and not just students. How do you square that circle at Le Rosey?
Our first element here is that we're lucky enough to, as I mentioned, have a number of adults that live on campus. And it creates a very different relationship with the teachers. When a math teacher is in class but has put Billy to bed last night, they know might have happened in the evening. They know they might have had a very sad breakup. They know that they might be upset because something happened at home. And so they'll have that connection that will make the students recognized. And I think that's the very first step, is that you need to listen. You need to know your students, and it's the most powerful well-being net, frankly. And then there's, of course, as most schools, a range of structures that we've put in place. We're very lucky to have our head of well-being that's actually an alumni from the school. And so she's gone through what the students are going through in their boarding life. And it's very easy for them to connect with her and to connect with our well-being team. And whereas a lot of schools have issues with students going and speaking to counselors, we're lucky enough that it's quite natural and this connection happens very well. So and even in small things, and you need the counselors to be very ingrained. If they're off-rooted people that work in their little area without any connections with anybody, it's going to be very tricky, because they're not going to know if a teacher has a particular worried. So you need to have people that are really ingrained in the school ethos, values, and the community that everybody trusts, kids as adults.
Christophe, we come to the back end of this interview, and I would be remiss in not asking you the question regarding privilege. And so your school is very famous for having incredible people. They pay an incredible fee. What do you have to say about that?
The first element is that we do have more diversity, socioeconomic diversity than most people believe, because we do have a number of students on scholarships. We also have a wide range of teachers' children that come from a different socioeconomic background than some of their peers. And so we have over 10% of the student body that might not be considered extremely wealthy. That being said, it's a trade-off. I think the fact that we have a community in that aspect that has a form of homogeneity is powerful because it removes any competition. It's powerful because it does mean what I said earlier, that the students won't feel like who their parents are matter in any way, shape, or form. The question then becomes, how do you add that diversity? How do you make sure that the children grow, and how do you have a more positive impact on the world beyond those families? And those two questions, I think we answer a little differently than having 50% of our children in scholarship, in that we make sure our students are exposed to a wide range of life experiences, be it with a number of associations and local organizations we work with that come on campus, where we go around, where we have a number of trips where they're exposed also to different walks of life, to different people. That is, of course, an important element. But there's also projects that we've run for a long time, where we think the impact for the dollar spent is actually quite high. We have a sister school in Bamako in Mali, where we have 4 times the number of students we have in Switzerland. They are extremely well educated in the school that is one of the most successful in Mali right now, with the most successful results, and with students going abroad and then coming back. And we have a vocational part of the school. So there's a very big impact there. There's also a project in Greece where we've worked, and the students have gone very regularly. Our students have gone very regularly with refugee children that were on unaccompanied minors. There's a project in Mexico that we're starting now around a musical school in the region in Mexico. So I think those projects are part of our social responsibility without a doubt, and in a way allow us to have probably a bigger impact than if we took 2 or 3 more students, really.
What is the one thing that you want everyone to know about Le Rosey?
That before you make any preconceived idea, you should come and visit it, because it is quite different than what most people believe. It's a school that is both very normal in the students you see, that are extremely kind, that are very happy to share what they're doing. They're incredibly ambitious. But it's also a school, of course, that has a wide range of opportunities beyond what most schools can offer. And it doesn't necessarily conform to the idea that many people have watching a few social media posts.
Christophe, you've been an incredible guest on this podcast. Thank you for sharing your insights. In summary, what I've heard from you over the course of this interview talks about how, what gives you energy is spending time with students and children. And I think that's a really great, takeaway from this interview by itself. And it may seem inobvious, but the point you make is that I think however demanding your responsibilities are at the top, The moment you lose connection with the people you're there to serve, you lose your way. So that's one really big message that I think I take away from this. The second is you made a really fundamental point about care. That care is not a soft quality. It is what sustains a leader when everything else is difficult. And it is what people around you will follow when I imagine strategy alone is not enough. You spoke specifically about 3 high-performance lessons. One is about asking front and center, how does this benefit the children? And I think that's a really great anchor that one can have. And it seems like an obvious thing to say, but you illustrate in different ways how often we lose our way when it comes to that particular point. The second, you repose your confidence and faith in the teaching profession. And you say teachers will always be the key. No matter what kind of innovation, technology, time we live in, human care is fundamental to the success of a school. And the third point you made on high performance was regarding, the need to be creative and fun. And I think that's a pretty important point, which is you talk about culture building and how those moments of levity kind of add, not incrementally, but transformationally to an experience. And that is what you have observed first as a student and now as the Director General of Le Rosey. Christophe, you have been an absolute star when it comes to the sector. And as I said, I was blown away with the visit to Le Rosey. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you made an invitation to all the people that are listening to this podcast to land up on the shores of Lake Geneva to come and see you and have a cup of tea with you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that.
Absolutely. I think education, sharing what they're doing is the most powerful way to move the whole educational world together, as you started with. And I fully agree with that. So very happy to have fellow educators come in and visit the school.
Christophe, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us on the EdVance Podcast. My final point is, if you as a listener found this podcast useful, please share it with colleagues and follow us on whichever platform you subscribe to for future episodes. On that note, thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the EdVance Podcast with Christophe Gudin, Director General of the Institut Le Rosey. Christophe shared his top 3 lessons for high performance in education. He said, first, never forget what gives you energy. For Christophe, that is spending time with students. Whatever your role, however demanding the responsibilities at the top, the moment you lose connection with the people you are there to serve, you lose your way. Second, if you care, it trickles to others and you do not give up. Care is not a soft quality. It is what sustains a leader when everything else is difficult. And it is what people around you will follow when strategy alone is not enough. And finally, the third lesson, he says, put the fish on the table. What he means is, do not shy away from difficult conversations. As Christophe put it, the problems that destroy schools are almost never the ones people could not see. They're the ones nobody was willing to name out loud. Christophe, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us on the EdVance Podcast. If you found this episode useful, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and follow the EdVance Podcast for future episodes. Thank you and goodbye.